Okay, so the Sneeko moist critical debate or discussion or whatever you want to call it, it really demonstrates almost everything wrong with the conservative and liberal mind viruses. And ultimately, these mind viruses are biases, right? But because they are so aggressive these days, the word bias just doesn't seem to cut it as an apt description. Probably the most obvious bias of all is that the other side has their brains hijacked by some brainworm hell bent on destroying insert your country here. And really, this is just intergroup bias, a social psychology term describing how the group we identify with is the righteous side, while those who are in the opposite group or just, other groups are in the wrong or evil. At best, they just don't matter and their opinions don't matter. So we have Sneeko, who has the conservative mind virus, and then we have Charlie, aka Moist Critical, who has the liberal mind virus. Now, it's important to note that both the conservative and liberal ideologies have merit, and that's exactly why we have and need both. But as we're going to see with these two guys, you need to know when to use which ideology. Because if you don't, you might end up saying something silly at best or enacting policies that ruin society at worst.
Adulthood is not something that you can set in stone because it's different for the entire world. Right? I moved out when I was 14. A lot of people don't move out until they're 25. I went through puberty when I was 17. A lot of people went through puberty when they were 13, 14, 15. It changes for everybody. So for you to say that this is the set in stone age and say you're a pedophile if it's under 18, and then if you're over 18, you're fine. Well, then that's a weird line that doesn't make sense. So you're going to say this person is a terrible person if they're 17 years old, 364 days, and right after that, they're good to go.
Okay, so let's start with Sneeko. He's arguing that the age of consent is foolish because it is arbitrary, as it varies from state to state and country to country. There is no set age that one begins puberty, and so there is no basis for there to be a set age that one can consent to sex. Okay, this argument stems from several conservative viewpoints. So, borrowing from The Conservative Mind by Russell Kirk, tradition is the bedrock of civilization, and that to lean on the wisdom of the past will yield the best future for society. Moreover, there is a natural hierarchy in society that again has been witnessed throughout the eons. And despite human imperfection, this is why we must lean on the past for guidance and to not make drastic changes that could yield destruction. So overall, life is crappy, and in order to improve it, we must go back to a time when life wasn't crap. This may seem overly simplistic, but that is essentially the bottom line. Okay. Of course, the obvious problem with this is, who said life was good in the past? It can't be the slaves, it can't be the serfs, it can't be the illiterate and uneducated, it can't be the child brides, the 8-year-old girl getting married to the 38-year-old man. Sneeko makes the claim that if both parties and the parents of both parties are okay with it, then why should anyone intervene and say that it's wrong? Here's the thing. We know there are girls who swoon over older celebrities, right? Or their friend's older brother. These are cultural tropes at this point. We can all agree to that. But what is being overlooked is that a child is going into a life-altering situation that, conservatively speaking, she will have little to no power to leave if things become abusive. Or even if they don't become abusive, she still has little to no power to leave. And if conservatives are so sensitive to the imperfections of mankind, there should be provisions for protecting children and adolescents. But that does not seem to be the case here. And it's ironic. Sneeko would argue that an 11-year-old and a 21-year-old want to get married. They should have that option. And yet, children can't even give informed consent for therapy. Children can give assent, but not consent, because the opportunity for exploitation is present. We know this because parents used to send their children for psychoanalysis, but the child didn't choose it for themselves. I used to date someone who, when she was a teen, she agreed to an arranged marriage. He was maybe a year or two older than her, so the risk of exploitation wasn't too bad, right? Well, today, she's happy that it didn't happen because she literally would have married a dude who became a terrorist. Think about that. Even though the power dynamic was minimal, people can make a mistake on who they choose to sleep with and who they choose to marry. I mean, there are 30-year-olds getting married today that are going to divorce in a few years, if not a few months. So why should we reassume the tradition of child brides when even adults mess up in terms of sex and marriage? Children, as well as adults, often think they know what they want, but they're dead wrong. Moreover, marriage is not a foolproof system, so to suggest adding another variable like a child bride makes it even more exploitative. Oh, and of course, let's not forget, it's not as if conservatives argue for the child being a boy and the adult being a woman. This brings us to what I consider to be the main cause of hypocrisy from the conservative mind virus. Not conservatism in totality, just the mind virus. Okay. People with this virus value tradition over people. This aids in the explanation of negative race relations, child brides, gunning for a monopoly of quote-unquote free markets, archaic sex/gender relations, and an overall fear of liberal talking points. Look, Sneeko is not wrong for caring about tradition. That's not the issue. Tradition has a lot of value for sure. The issue is that he's possessed by a mind virus that does not allow him to think flexibly. So even if he found the cutest 13-year-old and 30-year-old couple and their families couldn't be more excited for their pending nuptials and sex, please consider the following. 1. What is sexually enticing about someone who is still developing sexually? 2. What is romantically alluring about someone who you can't relate to? 3. Why do religious people always struggle to follow their own precepts and abstain from sex? What's the rush? The answer for all three is because they care more about tradition than they do for people. Leaning on the wisdom of the past will yield the best future for society? Yeah, sometimes, but in other times it won't. So should we lean on slavery, not using soap, bloodletting, human sacrifice, restricting education for the rich, and child brides? If we bring these back, the future sounds bleak.
Do you believe that somebody can go through hormone therapy? Can they change their gender if they're a child?
I think that's totally fine as long as everyone is consenting, as you agree with.
Charlie was asked by Sneeko if a child should be able to transition to the opposite sex or gender, to which he said yes. Interestingly, Charlie does not give an explanation as to why he has that opinion. He just believes it. Yikes. Okay, so let's construct an argument based on the liberal perspective, shall we? Immediately what jumps out is John Stuart Mill's harm principle from his book On Liberty. Essentially, one should be able to do whatever they want as long as it only affects the individual, whereas actions that affect society should be regulated. Moreover, free speech is important, and so one should express themselves, even though one's opinions may be wrong. This is exactly why one should express it, so that competing ideas can inform one of a better argument. Mill also argued that inequality be minimized so that others have the opportunities to truly experience liberty. So overall, life is crappy unless the individual gets to be who they really are inside. But if you do things that affect others, then it should be regulated because you could be infringing on what others want to experience. It's interesting to hear this because lately it is the conservative who wants to be free to say this and shoot that and stop this other thing. But this leads to the obvious liberal problem, which is that there is no way that one can truly do something for oneself that doesn't affect others. Their argument is that their choices shouldn't affect you, but how is that possible if the values one holds are different to another's? After all, if people's choices shouldn't bother others, why does the liberal Charlie care about the conservative Sneeko's child bride argument? Because it affects him and it affects others. The ace in the hole is that since everyone affects everyone by nature of existing, regulation has to occur. But this nullifies Charlie's argument that the child should be free to change their sex and gender as long as their parents are cool with it. Charlie might not be aware of this, but there's a subgenre on YouTube of teenagers and young adults regretting their transitions. And while they may be in the minority of people who transition, the error of the liberal mind virus is now apparent. The fact of the matter is, there are people who are 0.1% of the population, but we care about them, and that's a good thing. Should we not also care about the 1% of the 0.1%, the detransitioners? Should we not also care about them? I think we should. These people transitioned not because of personal liberty, but because of others, whether that be the opinion of doctors, peers, or even strangers online. For example, what was actually major depressive disorder, for some, was erroneously considered to be depression due to gender dysphoria. Now they have to live a new life where their liberty is restricted, where they can't revert to who they were simply because we don't have the technology to do so. The liberal may empathize, but if patience was exercised, the transitioner wouldn't have to deal with this pain in the first place. So what do I consider to be the main cause of hypocrisy from the liberal mind virus? Again, not liberalism in totality, just the mind virus. People with this virus value personal freedom over people. In other words, people should be free to do whatever floats their boat, but if your actions infringe on others, then it's not okay. However, I find that liberals find it very hard to practice what they preach. To their credit, if someone is gay, they should be able to be gay, just as straight people are allowed to be straight. The traditional viewpoint is needlessly antagonistic because gay people aren't trying to have sex with straight people. However, if people don't use your pronoun or disagree with a child transitioning or dislike old men twerking in front of kids at a gay pride parade, this is where the harm principle is also active. Those with the liberal mind virus are triggered when you don't agree with or don't allow them to do what they want to do, but their actions involve potential harm to other people, even if they sometimes think that it doesn't. You can't blame someone for misgendering you when they don't know you, or they just met you. And whether you are gay, bi, or straight, you can't perform sexual acts in front of children because they are not mature enough to understand and are negotiating other psychosocial stages at that time. Similarly, you can't watch a kid make a life-altering decision, there's that term again, life-altering decision, like changing their sex or gender, and not feel the same apprehension for a kid making a life-altering decision, such as marriage. Charlie's response to Sneeko struck me as far too relaxed and laissez-faire. But this is the exact issue. Liberals always seem like the good guy as they allow others to be who they are, but it becomes irresponsible when you don't truly weigh up what others are doing. We're supposed to care about each other. That's why acts that bother you will bother me, because empathy is a thing. Charlie cared about the child bride. He should care about this. If liberals are free to hate on homophobes and those who are anti-abortion or anti-immigration, are conservatives free to hate on gay and trans people? Based on Mill's harm principle, the answer should be no, because to hate is a personal act that harms others. But don't we see this happening on both sides of the political spectrum, all in the name of liberty? Liberty that was defined by the left. While it is good to escape the extremes of the conservative and the liberal, it is not particularly wise to be an extreme fence-sitter either. Some issues are clearly favored for the conservative answer or the liberal answer. Therefore, for one to continue to give credence to equal sides doesn't make sense, and it holds up progress. The centrists should be given credit for their ability to see value on both sides, that's for sure. But there are issues that are not bipartisan, and to say that they are is to suspend the solution from being applied. Therefore, the main cause of the centrist/moderate mind virus is that they care about people's opinion and feelings over enacting decisions. Again, overall, it's great to care about other people's opinions, but the centrist also fears being wrong and they fear backlash from either side, but inevitably, they get backlash from either side anyway. Plus, nothing ever gets done. As I said before, both conservatism and liberalism have value. Those who don't think so are definitely controlled by aggressive in-group out-group bias, for one simple fact. Without the opposite side of the argument, their argument, your argument, ceases to exist. Because we live in a relative world, there are always going to be differences. This is a fact of life that humans refuse to respect, as they instead choose to intimidate, control, minimize, laugh at, or kill those in their way. However, this is actually the basis for treating the conservative and liberal mind viruses, the respect of differences. Specifically, those suffering from the conservative mind virus must continue to value tradition while also valuing innovation and change. As the popular axiom goes, the only constant is change. Therefore, to favor tradition to such an extent that change is constantly seen as a threat is probably one of the most dangerous things a human could do. I heard a conversation with 3 black people who were against gay marriage because it goes against the culture. Yeah, you know what else was against the culture? Interracial marriage, the abolition of slavery, civil rights, racism. The lack of empathy is staggering, but empathy is not the tradition throughout the world. At least not yet, anyway. Then you have the conservative girlies talking about how men have built empires, so women should just shut up and make sandwiches. And yet, these same women work just as much as their male counterparts. Moreover, why are they even speaking? Oh, that's right, they're speaking because of the work of liberal women, the very women they deride. And as was stated earlier, liberty was never a tradition because, historically, most people were not free. Liberty has been in the public lexicon long enough that it has become a cherished value for the liberal and the conservative. So now it's a tradition. But the reason the biased conservative cannot see this is because they do not consciously value innovation and change. They just see it as a threat. For those suffering from the liberal mind virus, they must continue to value personal freedom while also valuing collective responsibility. In roughly 10,000 years of human civilization, we have seen what works and what doesn't. There were certain things that we kept because it was good for society, and certain things that were deemed detrimental for society, and so we dropped them. For an individual to put their desires above the needs of a functional society, whether the individual is liberal or conservative, is selfish. And if enough people do whatever they want without caring for society, society will fall. Liberals have the benefit where, as long as they continue to maintain their position, the position will become old enough to be co-opted by the conservatives as traditional. Conservatives, on the other hand, have the displeasure of losing things they blindly accepted and took for granted. But this isn't as positive for the liberal as it appears on the surface. Yes, people should be free to be who they are, as it makes the world a richer place. However, if the conservative does whatever they want, just as the liberal does, the problem of division has not only returned, it's been reinforced. You do what you want and I'll do what I want. This is not a good sentiment for people living in a society because it tends to yield violence. Without the sobering value of collective responsibility for our society, neither the liberal nor conservative have a common good to defend together. This is not to say that a trans person shouldn't transition, or a gay person should not be married, or a social minority group should not be treated with respect. Again, a human must be true to who they are. However, if a child wants to transition and the parent or doctor is totally fine with it because they solely focus on individual freedom, the parent and doctor are not fulfilling their obligation to the care of the child. Some people genuinely do have a bed nucleus of the stria terminalis that doesn't match their sex, and that's why they have the gender dysphoria. Some people genuinely don't, and are experiencing gender dysphoria for other reasons. That needs to be taken into account. If a social group, whether in the majority or the minority, seeks to attack any other group, clearly they are doing whatever they want. But is it in the best interest of the community, society, country, or planet? No. And ironically, we have history and tradition to show us that fact. So collectively, all of us together now, if we all can honor tradition, innovation/change, personal expression, and collective responsibility, if we can find the balance among these values, our societies could actually become quite positive. And this is so because the conservative and liberal mind viruses would be minimized into ideologies that we apply to our understanding of specific issues in specific contexts, not ideologies we adhere to slavishly and without thought. But here's one last thing you might not know. There are people who have a vested interest in division from either side. Some do it because they are possessed by their mind viruses, but others do it because they know they'll make a lot of money off of your misery. Consider what you want to do with your money and your mental energy, because both aren't cheap.